But around this time, he persists. He starts writing short stories, and his first real break is when the. Oh, fuck!
What happened?
Hold on. There's a bird in the house.
What the hell? Coming to you live, there is a bird in Lenore's house. Quoth the raven.
Socialist shelf. Read good books and organize yourself. Socialist shelf. Read good books and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf, and what you just heard is what happened when we tried to record our very spooky Edgar Allan Poe episode last week. Lenore, do you want to fill the crowd in on the details?
Yes. If there ever were an episode to be haunted, if there ever were an episode where a bat would get into my house at the time of recording, it would be our fucking Edgar Allan Poe episode. Listeners, I am not kidding. Like, what you just heard was me seeing a shadow pass across my, the lights and everything, and I'm like, okay, maybe a bug buzzes in front of the LED lights in my office at exactly the right time, exactly the right place. No, it's a literal bat. So, I don't know if we have been around long enough to like coalesce some tropes out of this, but if we were to make a socialist shelf bingo card, one of the spaces would be schedule slip due to improbable health problems from Lenore. Because, listeners, I had to go get a rabies series. As we speak, I gotta go in for the last round in a couple of days. But I'm fine. My cat is fine, of course. She's one and done because she's, 7.5 pounds, only takes one shot. And here we are. Here we are. We are, we're gonna make it work this time. No bats, I can say with a reasonable degree of certainty.
If it had been a raven, we would have just like had to not do the episode. Like it would have been like we've been like told by some being not to. I
It's
would have
like
been terrified.
Poe, you fucking named me. What more do you want from me?
Right, exactly. Edgar Allan Yo. He's like he's giving you the wave.
From beyond
Well,
the grave.
we're here to talk about Edgar Allan Poe, specifically two short stories, The Masque of the Red Death and Hop Frog. But first, we can get into the man himself. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, very, very famous fellow, but there's probably a lot you don't know about him. And now you're about to learn. So, Lenore, I think you've got the bio for us.
Yes, of course, if you listened to us last week, we spoke to Jonathan Melrod, a very valuable, very intriguing voice out of a different period in American labor history and a very, valuable one to listen to and to guide us in this historical moment. But this week we're back to the weird little guys, and
Back to the weird little guys.
Edgar Allan Poe was definitely qualifies, as we will find out. Now, he was born January 19th, 1809 in Boston. We were actually recording like a week to the day after his birthday. So, one for the coincidence nexus, bat notwithstanding. He was the second child of David and Elizabeth Poe. They were both actors. So he had an older brother and a younger sister, double income, but, double actor income. So, make of that what you will at the time. What his father made of it is that he skipped town in 1810,
Mhm.
and then his mother died of tuberculosis in 1811. So he's doing
Classic.
great. He's doing great. Uh, Now somebody else enters the story at this point. John Allen. He was a Scottish merchant who was based in Richmond, but he happened to be in the area. So he takes the kids into his home, the three Poe children, because he and his wife had no kids of their own. The family moves to the United Kingdom in 1815. Poe goes to school there until they move back to Richmond in 1820, so he's 11 at that time. Now, 11-year-old Poe, pretty materially comfortable childhood, though his foster father is a pretty strict disciplinarian. And that's before, now, even Alan's uncle dies. and leaves the family $750,000. Now that's 1825 money. Today, that's 19 million bucks.
Serious money.
Yeah, yeah, even today, that's serious money. So, with that serious money, Alan buys a new house and does an unserious thing. He calls his new house Moldavia.
That's pretty cool. Like if you come into like an obscure relative's wealth, you gotta like get an estate with it, I think.
You
That's
have
the
to
way.
do something weird. Like if I won the lottery, like I wouldn't necessarily say it, but there would be signs, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
One of those things is naming something in my life after a country.
And just suddenly having 100 cats.
Yes, yes, and they're all named after like really like obscure countries too. Like, oh yeah, there's my cat Carpatho, Ukraine.
Right, like yeah, dead countries or like little micronations that like briefly existed. Like yeah, that's my cat. What was it? Luhansk. Remember when that was a new
Sealand,
country?
Sealand, get off of the shelf.
Yeah, what's it? Liberland. You know about Liberland?
Oh, Liberal land.
Liberland.
Oh, I
It's a
thought you said liberal
libertarian.
land.
No, no, worse. It's a libertarian micronation.
Oh boy.
That's the cat we hate. That's the
There's
sort of
always one.
out
There's always
the
one.
outcat.
Now, hey,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Now, by the time Poe is 16, he meets a girl. He meets Sarah Elmira Royster. She's a year younger. As one tends to be at that age, they fall madly in love. They want to get married. They're actually engaged by the time Poe goes to UVA in 1826 to study ancient languages. Sarah's dad hears that his daughter is dating somebody who is studying ancient languages and is like, the fuck is this? You're not marrying that nerd. He's an orphan. He has no money, and he breaks them up. Now, of course, Alan was wealthy, but remember, Edgar was Alan's foster kid. So if Alan had a kid of his own for a legal heir, which eventually he did, Poe's at the mercy of Alan's charity. So drinking and smoking and gambling are outlawed at UVA. Nobody gives a shit because the students run everything. It is a Jeffersonian libertarian's dream. Indeed, Jefferson founded the school.
It's more of
Curriculum,
Liberland as a school, if you
yeah,
will.
right, exactly. Kind of. Curriculum is set by the students. Boarding is their responsibility. They're supposed to notify staff of any rule breaking. You can imagine how that goes. Now, Poe says he wasn't able to properly pay for a dorm and classes on the allowance that Alan gave him. Uh, this, I think, is definitely worth some examination because he also racked up serious gambling debts.
Hmm.
2,000 in a year, I found, which by my math is around 50,000 a day.
Gee,
Imagine racking up $50,000 in gambling debts when you were at college.
not a good time.
My
Not a good
parents would
time to
shoot me. You kidding? Yeah.
do that. I'd want to be shot.
Yeah. Alan's like, I'm not paying for this shit, of course. So Poe drops out of college in 1827. He hears that the girl he loves has married another man by this point. So he goes to Boston in April. The trip costs $12 at the time. Alan does not fund it. And Poe gets a desk job. He starts writing for a newspaper. Doesn't get him very far. In May, so he's only been there for about a month. In May, he joins the army. He lies about his name and age. He says, I'm 22. He's actually 18. Now, that same year, he puts out his very first book, Tamerlane and Other Poems, and is written under the pseudonym A Bostonian. So, at this time, he's a very young writer. He wears his influences on his sleeve. He's basically ripping off Byron and Shelley and Coleridge. It flops hard. It runs like 50 copies. It opens with an apology for his poetry sucking. Uh, and just to give you a sense of how obscure it was, one literary critic didn't even believe it existed. Like a copy of it didn't surface until 10 years after Poe's death. So,
Wow.
perfect, that belief doesn't fall out of the sky.
It's interesting that if you're gonna do an apology for your stuff being bad, you've got to like be doing a humble like brag, and it's got to actually be good. Like
Hmm.
you can't be like, oh, you can be like, oh, this is my humble abode and your place rules. You really gotta actually deliver if you're gonna do that apology up front, or just like don't put it out. If you
Yeah.
know it's bad, just don't put it out.
Or apologize, as you say, in a humble brag way, right? In a very specific way that directs people's attention to like elements of the craft that you want to emphasize.
I would
Which
like to do a congratulations, like a self-congratulation at the front of a bad book and say, you just bought this the piece of shit book. Like, I can't believe you fell for this. I think that would be a good way to open or close a book. The inverse of the humble brag It's the proud self put down.
There we go. There we go. I mean, there's always time to write an introduction.
Yeah.
So he does okay in the army for 2 years, but then he decides, no, I want to write for a living. And he tells his CEO everything. Like, hey, I lied. I'm not actually 22. I want to write, And his CEO's like, okay, you're signed for 5 years, but I'll let you out early on the condition that you make up with your foster dad. Which,
So weird. How is that allowed?
so like the arithmetic, I mean, first of all, Poe has to find a replacement, of course, but the arithmetic in my head that I'm thinking this guy did was okay. Like, this kid is clearly incapable of supporting himself. He was probably starving when he came to, like, join the army. Like, I can't just release him out into the wild, right? I have to make sure that he has somebody supporting him, because otherwise, that blood's on my hands.
I mean, maybe. Also, I'm curious, why did he lie about being 22 when 18 is like a legal military age? That doesn't make sense to me.
I haven't a clue.
Strange. Again, weird little guys, folks. Weird
I
little guys.
mean, kids were serving in the fucking Civil War, like, at 14, Like,
Right.
it's...
Like, I understand this was a slightly less desperate period for troops in American history than like a full-scale mobilization. But like presumably you could still, I don't know. Seems silly. But he's a silly fellow. He's a silly fellow, no
He
doubt.
is. He is. And almost too silly for Alan, because Alan resists at first, but finally he helps Poe find his replacement. Possibly they reconnect over Alan's wife dying, that kind of shared grief, and the arrangement is, okay, you're going to West Point instead. In the meantime, Poe puts out a second book later in 1829, so he's 20 at this point. 22 books, granted one of them, isn't even believed to exist, but, he put it out there. He starts at West Point in July 1830. He falls out again with Alan, of course, and he's like, okay, I'm going to get court-martialed on purpose. And he just starts showing up, he just starts not showing up to class, and he gets kicked out in February 1831, so he's not even there at West Point for like a year. Now, his buddies at West Point actually do like his work, and they help pay for the publication of his third book of poetry.
Good friends.
Yeah, exactly. It's again, that third book of poetry. I don't think there's anything that survives to this day, at least in the popular, lexicon. But at the time, the sky was the limit.
It seems like a big part of Poe's life is having other people like kind of feel bad for him and like kind of getting by on that. Like it's sort of the like she let me hit because I'm goofy, but like that for every relationship in his life. Of like they let me publish because I'm goofy. He let me
Yes,
home because I goofy. He forgave
personal,
gambling debt.
professional, romantic. Yeah, you can
All of it because he's a little goofy and a little pathetic.
you can get surprisingly far on charisma, especially in that day and age when there are no fucking rules.
It's a
Uh,
specific type of charisma too. Like it's like
mhm.
a it's not like a, I want to follow this guy. It's kind of like a actually Hop Frog, kind of like a court jester kind of charisma.
Exactly. You want to say like ply this dude with alcohol and just see where it goes.
Yeah.
But if he starts grinding his teeth, oh man, watch out. So he goes home to his extended family in March. His older brother drinks himself to death in August.
R.I.P.
Um, R.I.P. I didn't see what happened to his sister. I didn't look very far.
I'm
So
sure it was fine.
yeah, I'm sure. People weren't dying of like diphtheria and other like ancient diseases back then. So Poe was one of the first Americans now to make a living solely by writing. And at the time, as I said, there's no rules. There's no international copyright law. So it's hard to be an American writer anyway, because it's easier if you're a publisher to just rip off British books and sell them. Also, it's super shady because if you were a writer at this time, you frequently got paid late, if at all. He presses on, though. He starts writing short stories around this time. His first real break is when the Baltimore Saturday Visitor gives him a prize for his short story, Manuscript Found in a Bottle. Now, this guy, John P. Kennedy, is a wealthy Baltimore citizen. He really likes Poe's work, and he helps promote his stuff. He introduces him to the editor of the magazine, the Southern Literary Messenger. Poe, within 2 years, rises to the position of assistant editor. He gets fired after barely weeks on that job for drinking at work. So he promptly goes back to Baltimore. He does what any red-blooded American man would do after getting fired for drunkenness. He procures a license to marry his cousin.
Yeah, as it goes, as these things go.
Yes, he is 26. Virginia, his cousin, is 13. The
Okay, so
ceremony,
When he
Yeah.
fell in love with a 15-year-old, it was not when he was 16, it was not because they were close in age. It was because that's the age range he was just down for in general.
Yeah, at the time, yeah, I think he does grow out of that eventually, but way too late in life. The ceremony is May 1836. She cannot possibly be older than 14. A witness fakes like she's 21, so he knows what he's
Mm,
fucking doing. Like,
that's not good.
yeah, it's not cool. So he talks his way back into his job, believe it or not. He works there for about a year. And Poe says he quintupled the messenger's circulation during his tenure. Who knows if that's actually the case? He moves to Philadelphia in 1838, and he puts out his first and only novel that year, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It's about a guy who goes on a journey to Antarctica and has all kinds of adventures and whatnot. An early like science fiction story, you know.
Inspirational to Mountains of Madness as well.
Yes,
Mm,
Lovecraft cites him, I think directly in the text too, if I recall
mm,
correctly. He becomes the assistant editor of Burton's Gentleman's Magazine in 39. This is the year that he runs the fall of the House of Usher in this magazine.
mm-hmm.
He tries to start his own magazine the following year. He advertises about it. It doesn't go anywhere. 1841 rolls around. He swaps over to co-editor for Graham's magazine, and he does really well there. That's where The Murders in the Rue Morgue is published. It's a hit. It's frequently cited as the first modern detective story, funnily enough, and certainly it's the earliest to synthesize some of the mystery genre's recognizable tropes. You know, you got your detective who's kind of putting together all these disparate elements. You know, you have the big reveal right at the end. That was Poe initially. Now, the following year, he publishes one of the stories in question, The Masque of the Red Death.
There we go.
He also, and this is as political as Poe ever gets, he also tries to go into civil service. He lies about being a card-carrying member of the Whig Party. Yeah, the Whigs, I mean, they're
Of
not
all the parties to lie about being a member of.
they're not too terribly important historically. Like they're around for a generation. They come up in opposition to Andrew Jackson. They do some vaguely like bourgeois nationalist, like developmentalist stuff. And then they're gone by the Civil War because they can't articulate a strong position one way or another on slavery. There is a reason that a phrase for losing political relevance is going the way of the Whig.
It's also just really funny that you would like lie about being a member of them. It's like you don't have to do
Like
that.
I'm gonna lie about what's an irrelevant party. Like, you know, I don't want to get too sectarian, but like I'm gonna lie about being in the like Constitution Party or the Prohibition Party. You know,
Right,
like
like there's no reason to lie about like if you really that's such a silly thing to lie about. That's pretty funny.
so. Robert Tyler, the son of then President John Tyler, is a friend of Poe's, and Poe is supposed to meet his buddy to talk about getting a job.
Also,
Uh,
distant relative of mine. Worth
John Tyler,
noting.
really?
Yeah, going way back.
Well, I
Fathers,
mean,
fathers, 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 going back a few. But yeah.
John
But
Tyler has, I don't know about time of recording, but at least within the last couple of years, he had living grandchildren because
yes.
he and his son had kids like really old, and now like
Distant cousins of the Dallases, very distant cousins. I mean, it's a stretch to even really call us related, but like
mhm.
if I'm related to any president, it's John Tyler.
Ah,
So make of that what you will.
I wish I could remember what John Tyler did.
It's not a lot. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. That was his slogan though.
Oh, okay. So his greatest contribution to history is that one They Might Be Giants cover of Tippecanoe and Tyler too.
I mean, it's better than anything he did.
Hmm. Indeed, They Might Be Giants rocks, by the way. Their
Hmm.
first concert was a Sandinista rally, funnily enough. Um, that's neither here
Come
nor
on the
there.
pod.
Yes, please. John Linnell, John Flansburgh, come on the pod. Poe says he was sick, and that's why he didn't make the appointment. And his buddy's like, "Nah, you were drunk." So
Same
this
thing.
is unfortunate because 6 months prior, Poe's cousin wife, who by this time is finally of age, comes down with tuberculosis, and that's why he started to drink more heavily. He moves to New York in the midst of his sorrow. He gets a job at the Broadway Journal. First, he's the editor, then he comes to own it. And in 1845, he publishes The Raven, not in the Journal, but in the Evening Mirror. Now, it's popular even at the time. It gets a lot of exposure. It's one of the most famous poems ever written, not just in American history, but in the world. He makes $9 off of it. Like, you want to talk about just totally out of proportion to the effect it would eventually have, you know? This is it.
Mm.
So the
I mean,
following
this is
year,
on a Simpsons episode. This is
oh,
if you've made The Simpsons, you've made it.
Yeah, man, Simpsons have done everything, and
This was good Simpsons too. This was like first 10 seasons Simpsons. So like,
yeah, hasn't it had a revival recently?
I don't know. Email us, let us know.
Yeah, yeah, the Simpsons episode is not going to be for a while. The following year, the Broadway Journal fails, so Poe moves to the Bronx, and his wife's health, she ultimately dies in. Did I say his wife had died earlier? No, okay, she's come down with tuberculosis. She dies in January 1847. There we go.
RIP to a real one.
So Poe tries to strike up a relationship with this other girl, Sarah Helen Whitman. That fails. He starts banging his old girlfriend, Sarah, again. His drinking is getting worse. And amidst all this, in March 1849, he publishes our other story for tonight, Hop Frog, in the Boston paper, The Flag of Our Union. And by his own admission, he picks that because it paid well. October 3rd, 1849. He is found in the Baltimore streets, barely conscious and wearing someone else's clothes. He is unable to articulate how he came to be this way, and 4 days later, he dies. None of his medical records survive. So newspapers report that he drank himself to death, which is plausible, but we ultimately will never know. Now, Poe,
Is there any good counter theory to him drinking himself to death? Because that, given both his character and his symptoms, it's hard to think of anything else that could have happened there.
so I mean, there are hypotheses that Poe had like serious mental problems, or that he was a drug addict. Neither of which, are actually neither of which we have any actually real evidence for. Um, you know, part of that comes from this guy Rufus Wilmot Griswold, a contemporary of his, who hated him. Uh, Somehow ended up writing his obituary, right? And he's the one who depicted Poe as insane, right? So, like H.P. Lovecraft, Poe has this reputation as this like misanthropic shut-in who was insane and tormented, and it's not really warranted. Um,
I think that's
Now
actually good for his legacy, though. The same way it is for Lovecraft's.
it was,
I
yes,
think long
yes.
term, that's good for their legacy.
Yes, it was. Yes, and like at the time, because I mean the Edgar. So, God, his. I'll read a little bit excerpt from his obituary here. Edgar Allan Poe is dead. He died in Baltimore the day before yesterday. This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it. His obituary, like Jesus. So
Brutal.
so yeah, his reputation as tormented and insane, rather than just kind of a deadbeat, stems from Griswold not only writing his obituary, but somehow gaining control over his estate and publishing bizarre lies and literal forgeries about him. He was a drug addict. He was a pervert. I mean, he was a pervert, but that reputation, as we said, is largely posthumous. And Jacob, you're absolutely right. Griswold trying to ruin his reputation ends up fostering public interest in reading stuff by this crazy jackass, this weird little guy. Like, he was better known in life as a literary critic, and a really acrimonious one. One contemporary speculated that he used acid instead of ink when he wrote. For years, he publicly beefed with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who he thought was a plagiarist. Longfellow just kind of ignored him and let his followers return the invective.
He was letting his fans fight for him.
Yeah, yeah,
He
he
has
was
shooters.
he was nonetheless, he goes on to become a titanic figure in the Romantic literary movement. The Romantic movement, of course, emphasized emotion, the individual reaction of the author to nature, to beauty, to memory, essentially a reaction to the rationalist kind of aesthetic of the Enlightenment. Within that whole field came his subculture that he's come to shape, which is Gothic literature. And that focused particularly on horror, on the macabre, on fear, on, essentially the inescapable nature of the past, right? Of things thought dead and abandoned. I mean, dead relatives, like family, curses on your bloodline, malevolent architecture. That's Gothic literature, right? The inability to really escape the past. Um, Plot, character, setting, everything follows from that. Everything follows from that. And, indeed, Poe himself believed that the first thing you need to decide when writing a story is what effect you want to have on the reader. So he really fit into that milieu, right? In an essay he wrote detailing his literary method, right? He considered the death of a beautiful woman the most poetical topic in the world. And considering his luck with women, it's not hard to see why, right?
Right.
So, in addition to creating the modern detective story, being credited with that, he is also considered a forerunner of the field of science fiction. Jules Verne and H.P. Lovecraft both cite Arthur Gordon Pym as an influence on their work. Verne actually wrote a fan fiction sequel to Arthur Gordon Pym. Huxley, notably, was not a fan. He hated
Mhm.
Poe's use of meter, particularly in Ulalume. Um, largely very nerdy reasons that I don't necessarily agree with. Uh, Now, Jacob, I mentioned this to you before. I think anybody interested in historical materialism should naturally be drawn to Gothic literature, right? The very idea of a specter haunting Europe, I argue, is Gothic in nature, right? The lingering and compounding influence of contradictions years in the contradicting. And even if Poe himself avoided wading into the political arenas of his day, right, it's very easy to see in these two stories that we'll talk about the price of staving off the resolution of these contradictions.
It's a great way of putting it. And to have just one more resolution while you were talking, I looked up what happened to Poe's sister.
Yeah.
Uh, she lived to age 63 and she died of an inflammation of a stomach, which is very often due to either a tumor or heavy drinking. Um,
God damn it.
so that's she and her the fans of Edgar Allan Poe paid for her funeral. Like,
Oh, wow.
because she died after her brother, and like his fans, like his fan club basically like funded her funeral, bought her a really nice tombstone and stuff. So
He had
she wrote poetry as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We'll have to look that up. He had a really dedicated fan club, did Poe. Like until recently, like I think even within the past decade or so, there used to be a tradition where this masked man would leave a bottle of cognac and three red roses on his grave.
Hmm.
We've never found out who that is.
Also, according to this Poe fan website, there's disputes over the actual father fatherhood of Rosalie Poe, Poe's sister. Apparently, there
Really?
is some suspicion that she is the child of an affair, but that's for the if there's ever a Rosalie Mackenzie Poe episode, that's what it'll be about.
Yes, we'll get into her history on the paternity shelf.
She signed all her works, Rosalie, the sister of the poet. So.
That's an inferiority complex right there.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think an episode about her might just be an episode about Edgar Allan, but
Yeah.
okay. Well, do we want to do Hop Frog or Mask of Red Death first?
Oh, I mean, we've planned this exhaustively in advance. Let's do Masque of the Red Death, and then we'll cap off with Hot Frog because Hot Frog happens to be my favorite short story that he has written. It's certainly in my
Okay.
top five ever. So, Masque of the Red Death, if in case y'all don't know it, um, there is this pandemic raging throughout the country, just completely unchecked, and
Well,
it's devast.
let me actually read the opening paragraph here to
Yeah,
give them the sense. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleedings at the pores, with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair from without or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were cards, there was beauty, there was wine. All these in security were within. Without was the Red Death. That's how it
yeah.
opens.
The Red Death, really bad news, folks. But I mean, I think the bigger question here is, what's really in these vaccines? No, I'm sorry.
Honestly, Red Death, I remember there being like a conspiracy in like 2014 when like Ebola was like really concerning people that like
Oh
Edgar
yeah.
Allan Poe had like predicted like the Ebola outbreak that would kill everyone in the world. Because this does sound more like Ebola than anything other disease that I could describe off the top of my head. Obviously, it's a fake disease that he made up, but pretty scary time. Unless you're the Prince Prospero or one of his thousand friends.
Yeah, I mean Prospero, right? It's right there in the name. Again, it sounds hokey, but again, it's part and parcel of Poe's dedication to devoting every detail of the every detail, characters, setting, narrative, everything to the specific effect you want to produce in the reader, right? I mean, just these first couple of paragraphs, he is setting up what even if you're not familiar with the concept of dramatic irony, you read this and you're like, okay, but something is going to go wrong. There's going to be some kind of twist. And indeed, it's his single-minded devotion to producing this effect that makes him, that helps make him particularly good at it. You know, I do want to draw attention. It was towards the close of the fifth or sixth month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the prince Prospero entertained his thousand friends at a masked ball, the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. Poe here diverts and talks about the mansion of the castle, rather, the interior. He doesn't tell us about the masquerade at first, right? That's secondary. What he's really all about is the furniture and the decor.
Interesting too that easily missed, but Prospero has managed to survive 6 months of seclusion, while
Hmm.
presumably, well, not presumably, well, half the country has died.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, like his whole setup here, which he's like completely isolated himself. He's built this fortress away from the world. Honestly, so far so good. He's 6 months in. It's a notable thing about the Mask of Red Death is, of course, that the Red Death comes for everyone. But Prospero has been able to delay it. But everybody is very unsettled in this place, because there's obviously all this gothic shit going on. It even describes the window as a gothic window, and there's this clock that chimes every so often, and every
Hmm.
time it chimes, it makes everyone unsettled. And every time that happens, they're like, oh, I always get scared by that clock. I'm not going to get scared next time. And what do you know? They always get scared next time.
Yeah.
And not only is this kind of a funny image, but obviously it's like a symbol of inevitability. It's a symbol of the Red Death is fucking coming for you. It does not matter that you're here. You maybe bought yourself some time. Who cares? The Red Death is coming.
So I first got into Edgar Allan Poe when I was in about middle school, and Gris Grimley, who is a illustrator, he's really, really good at his aesthetic is like kind of like it looks really scratchy, really unsettling. Like every figure that he draws is kind of like trying to burst out of its skin. A lot of like rictus grins, a lot of like crazy like rolling eyes. His aesthetic is perfect for Edgar Allan Poe, and his illustration of everybody pausing and listening to the clock. It stands in such stark contrast to the party scenes that he draws. It really has to be seen to be believed. And indeed, any of the illustrations, whether it's him or whether it's Harry Clark from 1919, right? I don't think there's ever been, to my knowledge, there hasn't been bad like unfitting there hasn't been really a bad, like, unfitting aesthetic paired with this story. It's a very easy one, indeed, to summon up an aesthetic for. And indeed, aesthetically, like, you have the black clock, of course, but it is interesting to me because the rest of the rooms are outfitted in, single colors, right? You got a blue room, you got a white room, you got an orange room, and so on and so forth. So again, it is very deliberately made up this way by Prince Prospero. Like the text itself says, yeah, this guy had really eccentric tastes. So I do want to emphasize here, like the discomfort and the disconcerting sort of aesthetic, the constant reminder that there is going to be something out there that is stalking the land and trying to kill you. That is all Prince Prospero. He has deliberately invited this in, and there's a sort of fetish, I think, when you've lived long enough in enough privilege, in a stable enough society, there is certainly a sort of fetish, I think, that can be engendered that way to hold danger at arm's length, to kind of experience it, and yet, to be completely out of, out of harm's way.
Sure, sure. It's also notable that, while he's writing this story, his wife Virginia is literally dying of tuberculosis,
Yes.
you know, and and if I'm correct, his mother and brother had died of tuberculosis, as well as his foster mother. But you do have quite a bit of coughing up of blood and that sort of thing. That is a process. Um, Also worth noting, and I get this comes from Edgar Allan Poe, A Mournful and Never-Ending Remembrance by Kenneth Silverman. Poe, in fact, due to his familial trauma with tuberculosis, denied that his wife had it while she first developed it, and actually multiple times was like, "Nah, you're fine, you're good." Now that's terrible, awful, and she'd end up dying of it. Who can say? Maybe if she had gotten treatment, she would have survived. The treatment then was very poor for tuberculosis, so I won't say like, oh, he killed her by telling her to ignore it, but I can't say he certainly didn't make her chances better by doing that. So
I mean,
we
yeah.
don't know where in this process
Hmm.
this was, but somewhere in the process of his denial and acceptance of his wife's probably inevitable death, he's writing this story. So, obviously you've got this idea about like what Lenore's talking about, the idea of the comfortable person holding death at arm's length and some sort of interesting turning into a bauble, on the dashboard.
Yes.
You've got that on the one side, but on the other side, you also have Poe's very real, very human experience with fear of and denial of death. And the story is an interplay, right, between the human reckoning with death on the one side and the, let's say, class-based reckoning with mortality on the other side. And these are like two separate things that are kind of woven together in the story in a way that I don't think Poe quite has like figured out or perfectly synthesized, but they're like these are dual strains in the story because this is both the story about a class, a lord trying to sustain himself with his political power and capital, right? Trying to sustain his continued existence despite his conditions and actually succeeding in doing so for a period of time. That's why the 6 month thing is interesting. It's not the first day. And on the other side, the just very human fear of death. And those two things at play in this story, I think, are what makes it interesting. And I think when people think about Masque of Red Death, they just are like, oh, yeah, it's a story about the rich people getting their comeuppance. And it is, but it is also just about everybody having to come to terms with the fact that it's going to be them throwing up blood at some point.
Yes, yes, because notably, the brief mention that we've had so far of the Red Death ravaging the land is the only inkling of, the outside of the
Right.
peasantry, right, of whatever working class there is
We
in
just
this
know half of the
particular.
people are dead. Yeah, the paragraph I read at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it, and that's there is an intentionality there, right? Because, we are spending time with Prince Prospero A, but Prince Prospero has very conceivably just completely put it out of his mind. So, so have we. There's also as well, like, the inescapability of that sort of devastation, of these sort of contradictions, of shutting yourself away from the very people that are creating your wealth. This paragraph right here that ends after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds of the time that flies. Facially, right, it's kind of a ludicrous and a ludicrously granular detail.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, like, I remember 3 days into quarantine, because I was able to quarantine for the first little bit of COVID. I remember like being in a Discord call and playing Stellaris with like 8 of my friends, and like my cat jumps into my lap, and I'm like, "Oh, my cat has toes," and my friend was like, day 3 of quarantine," just because I had said something just completely inane, right? And that's the thing, like when you're locked up for long enough, you start noticing like weird shit, and just when there's so relatively little stimulation, you just start noticing like weird and inconsequential shit, But here, that weird and inconsequential shit is also the passage of time, right? It is also, the inescapable sense that yeah, this is going to end eventually. It's a constant denial, in other words, that we are party to here. Yeah, and a gay and magnificent revel indeed.
A question I have is he's choosing, and by he, Prince Prospero is choosing to hole up in this very grandiose Gothic castle, this bloodborne level of a castle. And notably, it he holds the masquerade ball in the seven colored rooms of the abbey.
Hmm.
And there are the seven colors. I believe it goes in order: blue, purple, green, orange, white, violet, and then it's like black illuminated by a scarlet light at the end.
Hmm.
And when he eventually gets chased, he runs through these. And I mean, I suppose that that's kind of a passage of time thing. It's a variation of the light. Obviously, it makes for very striking image in the head. But I was wondering if you think there's anything to do with that. What do you think about that? The only thing that I really got out of all of that, outside of just like, oh, this is cool, is that the large ebony clock is in the dark room and that people avoid it. So the dark room obviously is representative of death / the end. But what's the deal with all these other rooms and their other colors? What is it, just because it's cool?
Again, I think this is really something that comes out in illustration. It really has to be seen to be experienced. You can imagine each book. You can imagine each room having its specific aesthetic, certainly.
Sure.
Like the green. The green can be like, nature, like maybe there's a stuffed crocodile somewhere. The white is, very stark and very, there is a what?
Sorry, I'm just imagining the green as like a what's the place called? Rainforest Cafe. The
Oh,
green is the
fuck yeah.
Rainforest Cafe. Sorry.
Dude, like Prince Prospero in like this day and age would have like a rainforest cafe room, no
In his
doubt.
house.
Like Poe would write about it, and then from the sky descended an effusion of rain, yet indoors.
It's a peal of thunder.
But yeah, it is something that has to be imagined to be believed and is strongest when illustrated. Again, Gris Grimley, Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Mystery and Madness really
Mm.
does lend a diversity to this decor. And of course, like there is like there has to be a centerpiece of all this. If you are a rich asshole putting this together, like there has to be some climax to this journey that you're leading your guests through.
So
Oh
they're
yeah.
having the masquerade. And the
Mhm.
masquerade is, of course, they're gonna be wearing all kinds of outfits of different types. They're gonna show up in all manner of, use the term phantasm. Um, but a specific figure then shows up, and it describes it as thus. And by the way, it says the figure in question had out Heroded Herod. And I want to specifically say, to out Herod, that's referring to King Herod from the Bible. King Herod from the Bible, notable for two things, even though these are actually two different King Herods. The first King Herod is the dude who was so jealous of baby Jesus that he executed all the children under the age of 3 in a town. So just a bad guy. The second King Herod, who people mix him up, think he's the same guy. He's not. The second King Herod is a guy that was so self-obsessed. He had a party that was like so over the top and so like lavish, that he basically had a contest, and he told the winner could have literally anything they wanted, up to half his kingdom, which was a pretty impressive party. And anyway, it's a whole story where it ends up his like daughter-in-law, I think, ends up, or maybe his niece ends up like dancing so well she wins, and she asks for the head of John the Baptist, and R.I.P. John the Baptist. It's how he dies, and of course the Baptist denomination was, no, I'm just kidding. That's not how it started. Um, he said, I'm John the Baptist. Someone would introduce himself. So I'm Jacob the Methodist, as you know. But he said out Herod. So this guy who is
And I'm Lenore the atheist.
exactly is doing the most. Who is doing the most? He has out Herod. And it says, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jest, there are matters of which no jest can be properly made. The whole company, indeed, seem now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, enshrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave.
Habiliments is right, yeah.
Habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror.
Yes, yes. This is, Neil Patrick Harris making the zombie Amy Winehouse cake. This is Bill Maher dressing up as dead Steve Irwin, like months after he's died for Halloween. This is total violation of the rules of propriety, which, even here, are bent beyond any recognition of the people without.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, and it says, I like it makes the point there are people to whom life and death are jests, but there are still jests you can't make. And I think it's a little bit of a dig. It's like these people, the lives and deaths of others are jests, right? In this case of these people, this thousand elite, the lives and deaths of the people outside the castle are the jests. I'm sure people were dressed up as famine. I'm sure there were people dressed up as, different diseases and wars and shit that they had inflicted on the populace. But now this thing that they are hiding from is quite beyond the pale.
Yes, yes. And, Prospero, of course, is pretty triggered by this, right? And even, like, as I recall from the other Poe that I've read, his speech is archaic even for Poe, even for the 1840s or 1830s, right? Who dares thus to make mockery of our woes? Uncase the varlets, that we may know whom we have to hang tomorrow at sunrise from the battlements. Will no one stir at my bidding? Stop him, and strip him, I say, of those reddened vestures of sacrilege. Which, at this point, I'm reading this and I'm laughing because I know he's fucked.
Yeah. 100%.
But,
I'm also I like you saying that Prospero is triggered. The based patriot Red Death is triggering the woke Prosperian lives. Is the Red Death a progressive force? I think so.
I think so. I think, or a progressive force, or that's the thing. Like it's the Red Death doesn't bring. Unless we're going to talk about like the Black Death, right, and how its ravaging of the European continent sort of
supercharges capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. It depletes the sort of labor pool and allows people to, I don't know. We're going to get into the economics of the Black Death at some point. Maybe when we read the Years of Rice and Salt.
That would be the economics of the Black Death and the Years of Rice and Salt is everybody is dead.
So, it'll be much easier to talk about.
Yeah.
So, yes, the prince is in the blue room, and as first as he spoke, there was yes, it is blue, Oh, listen up. Here's a story about a blue prince in a blue castle, and all his shit is blue, and he goes through the rooms, and he's following the Red Death, who is spoiler alert, he is the Red Death, right? Jacob, are you okay?
I'm still cracking up. I'm sorry, I'm muted. Keep going.
Jacob here, suffering from the first symptoms of Red Death. We'll try to wrap it up quickly, folks.
Yeah, something like that.
Prospero, of course, is chasing this guy through the rooms, and he's got a dagger at this point, and he meets the Red Death in the Black Room, and he raises the dagger to strike. Summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask, which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. Prospero, of course, has collapsed. He is dead within half an hour, and of course, there's nobody in the costume, right? So the Red Death is here, folks, and of course, it spreads. It's as virulent as anything we've seen out of COVID, and now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. A thief in the night. That's a reference.
Yep.
And one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
It's worth
Again,
noting darkness and decay, at least in my version, are capitalized as well.
yes. That's in the text. Yes, they are capitalized, and yes, it's depressing, but there is a certain revelry in this last bit. I think there in dwelling on it. It's hammering home again and again what you knew was coming, and there is a certain catharsis, I think, in the reading of it. Because again, if you're reading this, you are not Prince Prospero. You are not one of Prince Prospero's thousand jackass friends. You are, maybe a petty bourgeois or maybe a worker, who has picked up a newspaper and is reading this, and you're like, yeah, you can't escape even if you're even if you're the head honcho.
Right. It's kind of like this idea of like the forces of time come for everyone, right? Death comes for everyone,
Mm.
which again brings it back to this like two lines that are interwoven here. There's the very human side of it where we're all Prince Prospero, right? And then there's the political side of it where Prince Prospero is a very particular type of political elite trying to insulate himself from the consequences of pretty much everything. And notable at the time, that Poe's writing, early 19th century, the elites they could insulate themselves from some things, but the contradictions of what they had created, the dark forces they had summoned and all that, they could not, with all their wealth, insulate themselves from that, right? There were still these things that would break through it. You still have multiple presidents, actually, for a period of decades, getting incredibly sick, unwell, several of them dying over a period of several decades over the early 19th century. They like to
Most
tell you,
notably, William Henry Harrison. He served a month in office and then he died of pneumonia.
they like to tell you William Henry Harrison died because of the rain and his speech. Fun fact, it's actually probably because of the fact that DC's sewer system was so bad and they didn't want to admit the president drank shit water.
Aha.
Which is an interesting tidbit I learned
Well,
from
and like
presidents.
Zachary Taylor as well. He died of some form of indigestion, I think, is the
Yeah, a
historical
lot of presidents getting
consensus.
sick around this time. So you have that going on. You have obviously
Interestingly, Michael Parenti thinks Zachary Taylor was murdered.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
I have to look into that.
yeah,
Um,
neither here nor there, but
you also have like the coming cataclysm of the American Civil War right over the horizon, right? You have the idea of all of these things that a class of rulers thinks that they can escape from.
mhm.
I can forever put this off because I am capable of insulating myself.
Yes,
And in what I like about this, and I've already said it once, I'm going to say it again, is that Prospero is safe for 6 months, right?
yes,
Like that actually is important. Half the
hmm
country dies before Prospero dies. Like his wealth does actually buy him that time. It can delay the inevitable, but there is still an inevitable reckoning that has to happen
yeah.
because he is human. So it's reminding you basically that everyone will, say it how you will, stand before God in judgment is kind of the idea.
Yes, exactly. And again,
Right.
to tie it back to the Whigs, the inciting incident that led them to finally split was 12 years, I think, from the publication of Masque of the Red Death, the Kansas-Nebraska Act,
Right.
which overturned the Missouri Compromise, which said, okay, slavery, that thing that was outlawed above the 3630 line, now that's overturned. It reopened that wound and it split the Whigs into basically pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions that dissolved into their various parties. Again, it's something that, I mean, this is not a pro Hamilton podcast by any stretch of the imagination, but I do genuinely enjoy a song from the Hamilton mixtape. The like B-sides, like the stuff that didn't make it into the show, and like the peripheral kind of songs that were written based on Hamilton. Right, Cabinet Battle Number 3, the one about slavery. Last line of that is George Washington saying, "Let's hope the next generation thinks of something better." And then there's a tick 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 boom sound. Like I mean, I will defend that particular song, because what it says is something very true. That these contradictions eventually do come to a head, and the leaders of a movement in one day may not be the leaders of a movement in the next political moment.
Will you defend the Hamilton B-side song "Say Yes to This"?
I will not. I will not.
I,
You'd have to.
I know that. Do not cite the deep magic to me. I was there when it was written.
I have my price. I have my price, and the price for that is very high indeed.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. Well,
So
also one last thing I want to point out
yes,
is this thief in the night metaphor he uses is second biblical metaphor in one short story. You know, he's
and a
got
very
the King Harry.
prefigurative one.
Yeah, and this time the thief of the night, and it's literally about the rapture, like the not really the rapture as we understand it as like American Christians, but the biblical understanding of the rapture, which was the day God rolls up and shit hits the fan, the like
Yes,
Judgment Day. There was no back when the Bible was written, you know, not to get on my like stump about this, but there was no concept of Jesus showing up and taking the save and 7 years of no, none of that, none of that. It was one day the sky's splitting and y'all are fucked if y'all are not in the right place at the right time, right?
and it wasn't until the mid 1800s or so that you see all these like millenarian
Mm.
um Christian sort of
Yeah, and
cults and
we get into that in the
communities.
Left Behind episode. You
Yeah.
know, feel
Hmm.
free if you're interested in that to go back and listen to the episode. But I make that point to say this that Poe also, when he's referencing Thief of the Night, is probably not referencing a rapture. He is referencing this moment of divine extreme judgment where it says in the Bible it'll come like a thief in the night. Like
Yes.
if you it says if the coming happens and you are standing on the roof of your house, you best not return home to grab a jacket. Like it's you have that little time. Like if you are out on a journey, you cannot look back to say goodbye to your wife. Like it's straight up. It also says something like, "Woe are pregnant women in those days." Like it's talking about like this is going to be a bad time. Like this is going to be a really bad time, right? And the Red Death has come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood bedew halls of their revel. And anyway, you know, cue the Bloodborne music, of course. But like, it's interesting that Poe is hitting these two kind of at the time obscure biblical references. Thief of the Night is a more popularized term by the 1970 or 1980 something Christian film, Thief in the Night. But at the time, this would have not been a widely used um, term. So it's cool to see it here.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out. You know, again, it's a it's not a it's not a context it's not a context that's familiar to me.
Mhm.
Um,
Apologies if I got any minor details wrong. Like I said, you've got the email. I've gotten emails before that have pointed out minor details, mistakes. I think I got like
I know I mentioned Taft Hartley in a previous episode, which you know was actually anti-union, and
nobody hit
uh,
you for that. I haven't received anything but love for the Melrod episode, if that's what you're referring to.
well, good, well, good. I mean, it's a very good episode, and you know, Jonathan Milrod, very very gracious guest, and I look forward to what he's involved in the future. And
Do we
speaking of
want to talk
people,
about Hop Frog, or do you have any more thoughts on the
I was
Masquerade?
about to say, speaking of people who are certified built different, Hop Frog.
Built worse. The first thing I want to say about Hop Frog is I want to express my incredible frustration that um, the film of Hop Frog, the adaptation directed by Mark Polanski, fell apart. Do you know about this, Lenore?
No.
In 2013, Mark Polanski of multiple works, he was in like Armageddon, a number of other stuff, like worked on, um, and uh, and producer Adam Schroeder, who did like Sleepy Hollow, The Truman Show, some stuff like that.
Oh, the Tim Burton Sleepy Hollow?
Yeah,
Oh, I love
he
that movie.
they were coming together to make a Hop Frog film, and Peter Dinklage signed on to star,
Yo!
and the movie fell apart.
No.
It fell apart in production, but Peter Dinklage signed on. Like he was apparently like all in, like very excited to play the role and like get into it. Um,
Man,
this was
that would
like
have been
2013,
incredible.
2014. Anyway, um,
Man, 2013 was really a year for like disappointments in terms of like literary adaptations that fell through. I think at that same time, the film adaptation of Paradise Lost fell through, right? The one with Bradley Cooper as
yeah.
Lucifer, right? And the director of that went on to direct Gods of Egypt, which was god fucking awful.
Well, I mean, fortunately, Peter Dinklage would never go on to be in any sort of disappointment of any literary adaptation.
Oh, certainly not.
It wasn't his fault. Hey, Peter Dinklage acted his ass off through those terrible lines in season 8 of Game of Thrones. It's not on him. not on him. But anyway, I will say that when I read that about that, I was like, yeah, he would have absolutely fucking owned as
Oh,
Hop Frog.
100%, dude.
But
Yeah.
it stands on its own. It is a good story, and I'm gonna make a confession here. This is the first time I ever read Hop Frog, was for this podcast. I
Really?
never read it. I'd read almost
Mm.
everything by Poe, I think. Like not everything, but like the classic short stories and a lot of the ones that weren't. But I just if I I'll say this. If I read Hop Frog, I didn't remember it. And it was a treat.
Mm. Hot Frog is, again, as I've said, it is one of my favorite short stories of all time. Certainly my favorite Poe. In terms of, I mean, again, Poe believed that you should decide what effect you want to have on the reader and then bend every effort toward creating that effect. And god damn, if this story isn't catharsis distilled for me, right? So Hot Frog, of course, the title character is a dwarf. He is he's the jester for this king of this unnamed kingdom. The important thing is that he is the court dwarf. Historically, court dwarves were a thing. If you were a jackass noble in Europe, you might have just a short guy wandering around who's just like there to be a novelty. I forget his name, but there was a court dwarf in England who was challenged to a duel by a nobleman at one point, and the nobleman picked a water gun as his weapon because he was like, ain't this guy ain't gonna fucking like take me out, and the dwarf ended up like shooting him directly between the eyes.
Yeah, the thing about the whole like God made every man and Smith and Wesson made him equal. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter his size. If he's holding a fucking gun, he's gonna kill your ass.
hmm Yeah, I wish I could remember his name. It's a fantastic story. But, so very similarly, Hop Frog is a story about such a man taking his vengeance on a king and on the king's seven advisors. And we don't know how the king rules, we don't know what the advisors advise him to do, but well, let's read the first paragraph.
Yeah.
I never knew anyone so keenly alive to a joke as the king was. He seemed to live only for joking. To tell a good story of the joke kind, and to tell it well, was the surest road to his favor. Thus it happened that his seven ministers were all noted for their accomplishments as jokers. They all took after the king, too, in being large, corpulent, oily men, as well as inimitable jokers. Whether people grow fat by joking, or whether there is something in fat itself which predisposes to a joke, I have never been quite able to determine, but certain it is that a lean joker is a rara avis in terris, a rare bird upon the earth. Okay, first of all, the fat phobia hasn't aged well. But
It's a
second,
funny way of putting it though. Like obviously the idea of like the substance contains it's like it's an it's such a weird way of like phrasing that. It's amusing if nothing else.
yes, and on the other hand, it is a speculation which is refuted directly in the text, as we will see, because Hot Frog himself is the jester. He is the greatest jester of all, as it happens, as we shall see. And yeah, what it is basically that Poe is setting up here is here's the king, here's his advisors, here is Hop Frog, who they shit on just constantly. Like that's all we know about the king's rule is that he is just constantly like giving Hop Frog a hard time because it's funny. And there's another dwarf at court, Trippetta, who is Hop Frog's best friend, and who, I mean, she's not really much of a character. She has some participation in what comes later on, but the real focus is Hop Frog.
I think she's actually well, actually I'll get to that, but I have a theory about Truppetta that I find
Oh,
interesting.
absolutely,
I'll get
yes.
into it, but it's
Yeah, I
actually
want to.
not part of the story. I have a theory that another character is based on her, but I'll talk about it in a minute.
Sure, sure. So yes, Hop Frog and Trippetta, they are basically the playthings of the king. Uh our king, as a matter of course, retained his fool. The fact is, he required something in the way of folly, if only to counterbalance the heavy wisdom of the seven wise men who were his ministers, not to mention himself. Again, he has Hop Frog around for a reason, but not necessarily the reason that he thinks he has him around. Now, interestingly, like Hop Frog here is not only a weird little guy, but he also reacts really, really poorly to alcohol. And it's been speculated by literary critics down through the decades, down through the centuries, that Hop Frog is in writing Hop Frog, um, Poe exhibits a moment of self-awareness, they think, because, Poe himself was a little guy who knew for a fact that he reacted very poorly to alcohol. Um, Again, we can't really get into the psychoanalysis of it. I think that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But there is another possibly autobiographical element to this, and it's that Poe had a rival in the literary critic world, whose advances romantic at one point that he spurned. It is speculated that this person and her kind of circle are supposed to be represented by the king and his ministers. So this is a form of literary revenge on these people. Again, who knows? But it's an interesting theory.
What do you think of the theory that this is based on the story of what is it, Belle des Ardennes, the
Oh
Charles
yeah,
VI?
the Baldear. So that's interesting. I read a
Yeah,
book.
pardon my French, literally this time.
Yes, literally. I read a book not long ago called Blood Royal by Eric Yeager, the author of The Last Duel, which went on to become the fantastic Adam Driver film. Blood
Okay, Eric
Royal,
Yeager.
Eric Yeager, yes,
Sorry,
and
Attack on Titan.
yes, Eric Yeager, who would go on
The one
to
who do genocide, yeah.
yes. Spoiler alert for the end of a as I understand it, fairly reactionary anime.
Pretty
Um,
fascist show.
yes. So, Blood Royal is about the murder of the Duke of Orleans, who was the advisor to Charles VI of France. And as I was reading this book, it goes over this episode called, as you said, Jacob, the Bal d'Ardent. And the king and his friends dress as wild men in highly flammable costumes, and they end up burning to death. And I'm like, wait a minute, I recognize this. Sure enough, what ends up happening in Hop Frog does have a historical precedent. So we'll
They
skip
don't
direct.
actually die though in the history though. They do survive in the history.
Yes, yeah, four of them die. Four of them die,
The
but
king makes it, right?
yeah, the king does make it. I'll just rip directly from Wikipedia here. The king only being saved by the quick thinking of his Aunt Joan, Duchess of Berry, who protected him from the flames beneath the folds of her great skirts.
Women love
Uh,
to be named the Duchess of Berry. Joan, the Duchess of Berry.
the Duchess
That's
of
cool.
Berry. I swear, like, Europeans do this on purpose.
Do anything.
Anyway, so yes, there is a historical episode that Poe very very likely draws from here, that he might have had in mind. It's a macabre story, right? It's certainly something that he would have been interested in, given
Hmm.
the stuff that he was drawn to. So, we've already kind of spoiled it. Hot Frog is summoned to the king and his advisors, to an audience with them, and the king's like, "Dude, there's a kick-ass banquet coming up. There's a kick-ass masquerade coming up, and we don't have cosplays for it. So you got to figure out, like, you got to help me come up with a theme, right, for me and my buddies." And at some point during the meeting, he not only makes Hot Frog drink, which Hot Frog fucking hates, but he throws beer or whatever in Trippetta's face. And this pushes Hot Frog over the edge. At one point, they hear this horrific sound like the grinding of teeth, which Hot Frog brushes off as, "Oh, there's a pet parrot in this room that's making this sound." No, it's Hot Frog grinding his teeth, and
But
we
Poe
know that.
likes to talk about grinding teeth. Like I think there's a couple others where like um he has one the short story about the guy who's in a suspended hypnotic state. I remember that one. He talks a lot about teeth in that one. I don't know what it's called, but I do know that it like he has a few stories I know that were grinding teeth. I think it's the facts in the case of whatever the guy's name is.
Monsieur Valdemar.
Yeah, that one. It focuses a lot on like grinding teeth.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean,
that's a
teeth.
thing Poe is into.
Teeth he used as a symbol, as I understand it, of like death, of inevitability,
They're bones,
and
they're exposed bone. That's
ex
something.
exactly, yes, so it's a visual reminder of the skeleton that hides inside you. By the way, everybody, there's a skeleton inside you right now. Just throwing that out there.
Got a
Hopefully this.
skull. It's right inside me. The skull, they made the skull emoji IRL.
Told you this was a spoopy episode.
It's very scary.
So yes, so Hop Frog, blows off the like teeth grinding episode, and he's like, "No, guys, I got this kick-ass idea from my country. We have this kind of farce that we do, this kind of theatrical sort of production called the Eight Chained Orangutans." And indeed, just like historically the Bal d'Ardent, right? What happened there? Hop Frog says, "Okay, guys, you got to dress up in this super flammable costume." And y'all are going to be orangutans, and you're going to pretend to be like escaped from the zoo or whatever, and you're going to be terrorizing everybody. And what really wins the king and his advisors over is, by the way, chicks are fucking terrified of this shit. That's what
They want to
really,
scare the hose.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what the king and his advisors are like, "Fuck it all." And like I love the little drip feed of information here. I cannot tell what was the association of idea, observed he, Hop Frog, very tranquilly, and as if he had never tasted wine in his life. But just after your Majesty had struck the girl and thrown the wine in her face, just after your Majesty had done this, and while the parrot was making that odd noise outside the window, there came into my mind a capital diversion, one of my own country frolics, often enacted among us at our masquerades, but here it will be new altogether. Unfortunately, however, it requires a company of 8 persons, and here we are, cried the king. And again, like he's totally walking into it. Again, Poe, master of dramatic fucking irony.
No doubt.
We call it the Eight Chained Orangutans.
That would be a kick-ass band name. Eight Chained Orangutans.
There is a isn't there a band that put out a album or oh yeah, in 2020. The British experimental rock band Black Midi adapted Hop Frog as a spoken word piece. Interesting. Anyway, it's also worth noting, in the 1960s, Roger Corman actually made a movie adaptation of Masque of the Red Death in which the plot of Hop Frog is a subplot.
Really? I mean, does it happen inside the like castle?
I believe so. Yeah, we gotta watch it at
Is
some point.
what is Prospero? Like, is Prospero like the king above the king, or is he like narrowly escaped death? I do wonder, because you'd think Prospero would be the king in this scenario.
I believe he does serve the let's see, at the castle. Francesca is finally dressed by Prospero's consort Juliana. The gathered nobility are entertained by 2 dwarf dancers. There's satanic cults and shit. Yeah, it's Prospero does serve the purpose of the king, or one of his courtiers does. Vincent
Makes
Price,
sense.
by the way, plays Prospero.
They end up trying to burst into this. They end up doing their orangutan act. You have their tumult. The 8 orangutans, taking Hop Frog's advice, waited patiently until midnight when the room was thoroughly filled with masqueraders before making their appearance. No sooner had the clock ceased striking, however, than they rushed, or rather rolled in altogether, for the impediments of their chains caused most of the party to fall and to stumble as they entered. The excitement among the masqueraders was prodigious, and filled the heart of the king with glee. As has been anticipated, there were not a few of the guests who supposed the ferocious-looking creatures to be beasts of some kind in reality, if not precisely orangutans. Many of the women swooned with affright, and had not the king taken the precaution to exclude all weapons from the saloon, his party might soon have been expiated of their frolic and their blood. As it was, a general rush was made for the doors, but the king had ordered them to be locked immediately upon his entrance, and at the dwarf's suggestion, the keys had been deposited with him. While the tumult was at its height, and each masquerader attentive only to his own safety, for in fact there was much real danger from the pressure of the excited crowd, the chain by which the chandelier ordinarily hung and had been drawn up on its removal might have been seen very gradually to descend, until its hooked extremity came within 3 feet of the floor. And it goes on. There's this whole period where they get caught, and then Hop Frog runs up. He seizes a flambeau and says, with the agility of a monkey upon the king's head, and thence clambered a few feet up the chain, holding down the torch to examine the group of orangutans, and still screaming, I shall soon find out who they are. And everyone's collapsed in laughter. The king is still laughing. And of course, he sets this motherfucker on fire.
Yes.
And he says, I now see distinctly what manner of people these maskers are. They are a great king and his 7 privy councillors. A king who does not scruple to strike a defenseless girl, and his 7 councillors who abet him in the outrage. As for myself, I am simply Hop Frog the jester, and this is my last jest.
Mm-hmm.
The killing joke, if you will.
Christopher, yeah, Christopher Lee, there's a recording of Christopher Lee reading this story on YouTube. I highly recommend y'all seek it out. I mean, that was a celebrity death that hurt me. Like his voice is one of a kind, truly. But again, it goes up to this moment of catharsis. You have the king and his advisors, doing the ultimate jest, as it were, right? And indeed, the there is a certain hubris inherent not only in leaving the keys to this room with this dude who you spend your whole life abusing, but also in, doing this joke in the first place, right? Because as it mentions, there was a real danger from the press of people fleeing for the doors, right? People could legit get hurt from this.
Well, yeah,
Doesn't
he
fucking
locked
matter.
the doors. I mean,
Yeah. Oh
and
yeah,
he was
no, like
rushing around. Yeah,
yeah, part and parcel of the jesting that the king does, people might get hurt.
and so, it comes back to this sort of like, obviously, I don't read Poe as this guy who's making these like incredibly keen political insights or someone who's
No.
writing some kind of like amazing class-based whatever. He's telling his story with the very intent of like, this is what I'm going to do. Irony, or this is what I'm going to do. Melancholy or
Hmm.
horror or whatever. However, there is a class analysis, obviously, here that's more, it's one of those like very clear class stories that we actually see so often, especially in like this period of literature. I find it interesting how many like 19th century stories there are about like kings and lords getting their comeuppance, which is
Yes.
interesting because it's like the period of kings and lords getting their like geopolitical comeuppance. So,
Hmm.
neither here nor there, just that Poe is kind of absorbing the kind of the world around him and putting this down on the page. And I find it to be interesting. But now I will put forth my theory. And I think after reading this and some of the language used specifically in it, that the relationship between Tyrion and Penny in Dance of Dragons, by the way, character that does not show up in the show, Penny, is based on this short story. Lenore, have you read Dance with Dragons?
I've only ever read A Game of Thrones back in
Okay.
high school.
Well, Penny is a dwarf woman who is sort of this captured dwarf woman who is this performer slash dancer, and she has this sort of beauty to her that Tyrion has this like he has this weird like fucked up relationship to her. It's a whole thing, like everything is in Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire. But the relationship like of this like weird, incredibly violent defensiveness of this one dwarf whose cleverness is like all surpassing against these lords that he's scheming to overthrow. And you have this other dwarf who this female dwarf who he has this like defensiveness of. And there's a few like certain lines in it that I don't have Dance with Dragons on me, so I don't have the exact quotes, but there's like multiple times in it. And this is also the period where Tyrion is posing as a fool to get it in like motley to get across. And I don't know, George R. R. Martin loves to just throw in little like stuff he was reading at the time. Like I was gonna say famously, but not famously. A lot of people don't know that he straight up just has a Cinderella reference in Storm of Swords for like no particular reason other than he was just watching the movie Cinderella, decided to have a character's shoe fall off while something happened. He loves to just do stuff like that. And I feel very strongly that it is very likely that instead of writing as he should be doing, Martin was browsing poststories.com when avoiding writing Dance with Dragons, and
As one
he
does.
put this one together. No hate to Martin. I'm not one of those like getting his replies, finish the book kind of people. The book will be done if it's done, and if it's not, he's having fun operating an independent bookstore and little film shop that he gave full COVID leave to all his workers at, and they like actually pays well, and he just
Good.
does films that they won't play anywhere else. And he also, for some reason, owns a wolf sanctuary. Weird
Oh
guy.
yeah.
Another example of if I ever become a millionaire, you won't know, but there will be signs. I'll own a wolf sanctuary and a theater that plays movies nobody else will play. But yeah, all that is to say, Hop Frog, I think has some influence on George R. R. Martin.
Oh, 100%, 100%.
That's not just the Peter Dinklage connection, because actually Peter Dinklage, and whenever we do Game of Thrones, I'll get into this, didn't get to be the Tyrion from Dance of Dragons, and that's possibly the series' greatest crime.
Yes. But again,
Sorry,
like
that's a whole different thing.
no, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's and we'll get into that eventually. Maybe the second long series summer at some point.
That'd be a whole thing.
Long series summer two, Game of Thrones book. I don't know, but you do raise a very correct and valid point here, which is that this is one of many stories in which, yeah, a king and his entourage receive their comeuppance. I mean, all the way back to Shakespeare, although, you have kings receiving their comeuppance certainly at the hands of other nobility in a lot of his stories as well. Um there is the recognition, I think, passively in the minds of both authors and the audiences for which they write, that yes, there are these contradictions and they will resolve themselves at some point, through some way that nobody who perpetuates these contradictions can necessarily predict. I'm thinking right now of Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, right? That all that is about, the head of the King of Spain's household, right? His son is murdered. He is constantly barred from, making a suit to the king against his son's murderers, who he knows who fucking did it. And what happens, eventually he goes mad and he decides, okay, I'm just going to kill these guys myself. The laws of man, where they end and where they are imperfect, are eventually, the laws of God pick up from them. The laws of, God, nature, whoever, right? Vengeance, the spirit of vengeance. Um,
Or like nature itself, the Red Death,
exactly,
the
exactly.
thief in the
Like
night.
if there is an injustice that is, the laws of man are not equipped to handle, they will be handled by some other force, or they will handle you.
Right? The laws of man, and also notably the laws of a short story with this kind of structure. Because kind of from the beginning where this is going, right? When you get the king, like you kind of see the cycle. And it's not like some kind of, oh, it's so predictable kind of thing. It's not it's a mistake. It's actually intentionally structured that way. And it is interesting that some of these short stories, especially from this period, can be written with this very, you said it best, this very particular feeling put ahead of time, and you can kind of go into it knowing the rules of the world, and you can already kind of see where everything is shaping up towards, and you can actually kind of be part of the joke on the king as it happens. It's kind
Yes.
of structured to do it that way. So, obviously it's this whole laws of nature sort of gravitas kind of thing, but it's also just kind of the internal laws of the short story without
Mhm.
getting into any kind of like over the complicated world building or like wondering, where did Hop Frog come from, this, that, or the other. Like, within the confines of the story, you're tracing it through and knowing where it's going to land and kind of enjoying it as it does so. It's
Mhm.
almost it almost has it's actually Poe stories in general. Obviously, you talked about his mystery novel, or not mystery novel, but his mystery short stories and his detective kind of thing. But a lot of his work has the kind of cadence of that, in that kind of way where it's enjoyable for the reader to kind of get drip fed the ahas, so they come to the aha at the moment of climax, right? At the moment of conclusion. You don't really have Poe stories like, oh, my literature professor in college once said, no one likes a story where at the end of the story it says, but what do I know? I'm just a parrot. And then you say, what the fuck? That this story had nothing to do with the parrot. And then you're just frustrated. And the point of it is that you got tricked, but there is no trick. It's just like, why did this story end with I'm just a parrot? Right? Which it sounds random, but there is a type of like, haha, fake out. That's not a thing Poe likes to do.
Mhm.
Poe likes to land its, if even you can call it a twist, he likes the reader and the story to land at the same time.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's the polar opposite of and this is a reference that predates me, of course. It predates most anybody listening, I think. You familiar with the TV show Dallas?
I mean, I know what it is. I've not watched it.
So it ran in like the 1970s, and like a character that I think JR is his name, a character that was really, really popular with the fans was killed off in one of the partway through one of the seasons. And like the season finale was the character's wife waking up from her bed, and she goes into the bathroom and there's the fucking character who has died, who's getting out of the shower, and she's like, "Honey, I had the craziest dream." And it's revealed that the whole previous season was a dream. This character who was apparently killed off was not actually killed off. There's no reason that he's come back. You know, it's just by popular demand he has come back, and everything that happened is completely invalidated. That's not something that Poe does. Everything that he does is subordinated to this effect that is being created in the reader. And indeed, everything Poe does has origins in history, has origins as you said, the Thief in the Night reference. It has origins in what he is paying attention to, what he is reading, what he is consuming in the day. There is, it's craft. There's a reason for what he incorporates and for the twists and turns narratively in his stories. There is nothing that is left to whim.
Mm. So at the end of the day, then why did Debbie do Dallas instead of Poe?
Oh, well, that is something that I can speak to, actually, having written a fan fiction story. We mentioned this on our collab that we did with Worst of All Possible Worlds last year, the Wit Fucking Dies episode, right? I wrote a fan fiction story inserting the person who commissioned it into the final sex scene of Debbie Does Dallas. And unfortunately, I don't recall why. I think
Not anything there. It's just a thing. It's much like a Poe story. You just kind of got to follow the world's internal rules. It happened because it happened.
the only internal rule that I was really following is, hey, I make 3 cents a word, pay me. I am
Well,
undercharging for erotica.
well, we've read these two short stories. Poe as an author for me is still somebody that I think by virtue of what is said about him, the aesthetic around him, the fan base around him, the concept of Poe, um, his work is actually feels quite different, I think, than you would expect. I think based on the understanding that you would have from Poe from popular culture, and maybe even from your English class, um, every story would just be the most horrifying thing you've ever heard in your entire life. Every story would be fucking a saw trap, right?
Mm.
And he's got some pretty messed up stuff. Obviously, he's got a heart under the floorboards in one of his most famous, if not his most famous. He's
Mhm.
got, a guy, he's got a whole thing about being buried alive. He's got some scary stuff. He's got in Hop Frog, it's kind of a joke, but a guy does burn to death. But I think there is something to Poe beyond the characterization that he has been given. Cool and badass as that characterization is. And it is an author who is interestingly enough, very often not writing to fit a certain theme, a certain aesthetic, but actually just writing to sell the story. If you look at almost every story he wrote, the story behind why he wrote it the way it did was he's pitching it for this reason. He's publishing it for this reason. He's going to make this amount of money for this different reason. He wasn't an incredibly mercenary guy, but he was a guy who was at the whims of the market in this interesting way. Especially in this period where he's it's becoming viable to be a writer, and then will again become inviable. And as this emerging guy in a period where there used to be just before him people who had patrons, and he's no longer in that era, but he's no longer in this era of mass media. He kind of sits in this in between place, and a lot of his stories are just him trying to do his thing and fitting it into these different literary journals, and piecing it together. And it's led to some of his work being lost. It's led to, not really knowing what direction he wanted to take different things. And ultimately it leaves a kind of scrambled vision of him that forces him to be a human being. And that's less exciting than honestly just the vision of Poe with the dark background and the blood and the fucking raven and the kind of the gaunt specter of a man who just poured out diseased ramblings. But that's not what he was. And I don't have a great takeaway from that. It's just a thing I
Well,
want to say.
I just before this episode went to record, I finished reading Vincent Bevan's wonderful book, If We Burn, about the protest movement decade of 2010 to 2020. horizontalization of such movements and where they succeeded and where they failed and what we can learn from them. And what he says in the very last chapter, Building the Future, right, is, regardless of the shape that these protests take, there is something that if you're taking part in this protest, there is a sense of injustice. There is a sense of things being not as they ought to be. There is a sense that the world can be different from what it currently is, from what you see, right? There is, you get into later the material forms that these things take and how, and the ends and the means of pursuing those ends, right? There is something, immaterial in your soul that develops over time that ultimately drives you out there. And Poe is a missed opportunity for these sorts of things, right? Because again, he has passively absorbed these the fact that there are contradictions in society and that they can come to fruition, right? But he himself was not a political writer, but nevertheless, he recognized that what he writes about speaks to people, right? There is this catharsis in seeing these contradictions resolved, and, quite apart from, the fact that they make a really good story, such contradictions can drive people to actually go out and resolve them themselves and take an active part in that resolution, And again, missed opportunity, yes, but also it produced some really fucking great literature.
Really good literature, but maybe most importantly of all, the most important part of Poe's legacy that we haven't touched on, the epic rap battle of history where he was played by George Watsky. If that wasn't definitely copyrighted, I would put the music in here, but I don't know what.
Who was he rapping against at that point in time?
Stephen King.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, Stephen King, King acknowledges Poe and Lovecraft in the same breath as Titanic influences on his work. Interestingly, we were talking about this earlier. There's this mobile game called Sid Story. It's one of those that does cute anime girl versions of historical figures.
More like mid-story. Am I right? Sorry, I've never played it. I have no idea.
I can't speak to the quality or lack thereof, but Poe in that game is a cat girl, which is very funny if you've ever read The Black Cat, which is about a cat that gets bricked up and dies and ultimately destroys this guy's life.
R.I.P. to the cat, R.I.P. to Poe's sister, R.I.P. to every woman Poe ever loved, and R.I.P. to Poe. You shouldn't have had that second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth drink. Sucks to see. But he might still be among us if he had just not had that extra drink. Well, regardless, we appreciate you for listening to this episode of The Socialist Shelf. As always, you can email us at The Socialist Shelf. Yeah, that "the" is important at the front, at gmail.com. I've gotten some cool, neat emails over the last few weeks, some nice stuff. Several people have thoughts on the Ministry for the Future episode still, which is interesting. I guess it's just a book that engenders conversation, thought. So, maybe we have to do a return to Kim Stanley Robinson at some point. Or maybe I should just shoot him an email. He's been on podcasts. We'll see.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to him.
Who knows? I mean, I've only ever heard him on podcasts much, much larger than ours. But, well, what can I lose by shooting an email? Aside from, I guess I could get Kim Stanley Robinson sending back "fuck no," and I would then feel really bad about myself. But I don't expect that to happen.
Hey, Jonathan Melrod got Mao to send him his complete works. You never know.
That's true. Well, folks, we appreciate you all very much. And episode specific send off of something about burning an orangutan. I don't know. You got anything, Lenore? I am simply Jacob the Jester, and this is my last jest.
Here's to the rare and radiant maiden that I hope I can one day become.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.